By the time the sun rose on October 13th, 1871, the Doyle home stood silent, doors unlatched, windows open, curtains trembling in the wind. The family was gone. The neighbors said the beds were still warm, the hearth still burning, and Catherine's small shoes were found by the door, positioned neatly side by side, as if she had been preparing for Sunday Mass. But there were signs of something else: ash along the floorboards, claw marks on the inside of the cellar door, and a smell iron and soil, thick enough to sting the nose. When Sheriff Alden arrived, he found no footprints leading away from the property, only a single trail of ash leading toward the church on the hill. The Reverend claimed he'd been in prayer all night, but his hands were blistered raw, as if from holding a burning object. Within days, rumors spread that the Reverend had locked the child in the church crypt, that he had tried to exorcise her, that she had spoken one final prophecy, something so horrifying that he'd torn out his own tongue to silence it. The church denied everything. The official report read only, "Family presumed dead, fire accident suspected." But no fire had been found, no ashes beyond that thin trail, winding like a serpent toward the altar. And yet, every night after, the bells of Hollow Creek tolled 13 times at midnight, though there were only 12 bells in the tower. A low, metallic hum swells the sound of something heavy shifting in the dark. Narrator V. Oh, the town called it coincidence. But those who stayed in Hollow Creek long enough said the 13th bell wasn't heard with the ears. It was heard inside the skull, fade out. A heartbeat echoes faintly, matching the bell's toll. Beneath St. Bridget's Church, there are rooms no one remembers building. Old maps of Hollow Creek show no record of a crypt, yet in 1924, half a century after the Doyles vanished, a maintenance worker repairing the foundation found a hollow beneath the altar, an entire stone passage sealed shut with melted wax and iron nails. Inside they found what the newspapers called a chamber of devotion, though the photographs now lost told another story. The walls were carved with faces, not painted, carved, dozens of them, small and childlike, their mouths open as if mid-scream. And in the center of the floor, an engraving, "She spoke, and the silence bled." The discovery was never made public. The diocese sent its own men, sealed the chamber again, and ordered the worker transferred to another parish. He never arrived. Weeks later, his wife reported hearing scratching beneath their home, the same sound he described coming from under the church floor. Locals whispered that the crypt wasn't built by the parish at all, that it predated the church, maybe even the town itself. The stones didn't match any New England quarry. They were older, porous, streaked with something that wasn't dust. That winter during Mass, the ground beneath St. Bridget's trembled. Parishioners claimed to hear a child's voice echo from beneath the floorboards, whispering in Latin, repeating a single phrase, verbum redeat. The word has returned. A low breath. The faint sound of a child humming a hymn plays under the silence. Narrator V. Oh, no one in Hollow Creek spoke of Catherine Doyle again, but beneath St. Bridget's, her voice had never stopped. Fade out. The sound of the hymn continues, distorted, until it cuts abruptly. When truth threatens sanctity, it is rewritten as faith. In 1872, 1 year after the Doyles' disappearance, the Diocese of Boston quietly dispatched a team of clergy to Hollow Creek. Their purpose, according to internal memoranda recovered a century later, was not to investigate, but to sanitize. Parish records were burned, baptismal registries erased. Even the town's census was altered to omit the name Doyle. Within 6 months, Hollow Creek ceased to appear on any map distributed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but erasure left traces. A single letter dated December 19, 1872, stamped with the Vatican seal, was found decades later in the attic of a Jesuit seminary. It was addressed to a Father Callahan, the presiding priest of St. Bridget's. Your report of the girl's utterances has reached Rome. These are not dreams nor sickness. You are to seal the vault and pray for silence. Do not speak her name, for names are doors. Once opened, they do not close. The letter was unsigned. Witness accounts from that winter describe wagons arriving at night, hauling stone and soil from the church's foundation. Workers said the ground beneath the altar was warm, even in the dead of January. One claimed he heard whispering through the marble, though the others insisted it was only the wind. By spring, St. Bridget's stood on new flooring, and the crypt's entrance was entombed beneath it. The diocese declared the work routine restoration, yet, among the town's dwindling population, an unease settled, an instinctive awareness that something beneath them had not been buried, only fed silence. Soft static builds the sound of a tape rewinding. Narrator V. Oh, some say the church protects souls, others say it protects secrets, but in Hollow Creek, it protected something far older, and it was still listening. Fade to black. A faint child's breath echoes once before silence. When a secret cannot be destroyed, it is disguised. By 1874, 2 years after the Doyle incident was erased from the public record, the diocese announced the founding of a charitable refuge. On the outskirts of Hollow Creek, St. Bridget's School for Lost Girls. Officially, it was meant to house orphans displaced by the textile fires up north. Unofficially, it was a containment site, led by Mother Abilene Crow, a nun whose reputation for discipline through silence was well known across New England. The school operated under strict conditions: no mirrors, no writing after sundown, and no child was to speak aloud during prayer. Within weeks, the girls began to experience what the nuns called night voices. They would wake screaming, hands clamped over their ears, claiming to hear a child whispering to them from under the floorboards. One girl, Eleanor Pike, refused to enter the chapel after dark. She said the voice told her things: birth secrets, unconfessed sins, deaths yet to come. When asked who the voice belonged to, Eleanor trembled and said only, "She says her name is Catherine." Mother Abilene ordered the girl confined for blasphemy. By morning, Eleanor's room was empty, her bedding soaked, her mouth filled with ash. The incident was never recorded in the parish ledger, but a single note survives, scrawled on the back of a hymn sheet, dated May 3, 1875. The girl spoke the forbidden word again. The others joined. The walls shook. Thunder rolls. The faint hum of a hymn rises, but this time, the choir of children's voices is out of sync, each singing a different line. Narrator V. Oh, they built a school to hide her, but the voice that spoke through Catherine Doyle was never confined. It simply found new mouths, fade to black. A single child's laugh echoes, breaking into a sob before cutting out. Every secret seeks paper. Even silence needs to be recorded. In 1876, a young priest named Father Thomas Wren was sent to assist Mother Abilene at St. Bridget's School. He was quiet, devout, and most dangerously curious. Within weeks, he began to suspect the nuns were hiding something beneath the chapel floor. Late one night, guided by the faint sound of humming the same children's hymn sung off Guy Wren pried open a rotted floorboard behind the altar. Beneath it lay a locked chest, wrapped in oilcloth and sealed with wax. Inside, he found the confession ledger. The book was unlike any church record. Its pages were filled not with names or sins, but with transcripts of the girl's dreams. Each entry was dated, signed by Mother Abilene herself. The handwriting was unsteady, as though written by a shaking hand. One entry, marked March 12, 1876, read, "She speaks again through the smaller one. She knows what we think before we do. She said the word return. She said my name before I entered the room." Another, dated April 1st, contained only a single line, written in red ink. "If we silence them, we silence God." Father Wren wrote his own entry that night, a final confession hidden among the pages. The voices are not of the dead. They are of the unborn memories trying to be born. He sealed the ledger and placed it in the chapel's cornerstone for safekeeping. Days later, Father Wren vanished. His room was found stripped bare, except for a single piece of parchment pinned to the wall. The word has remembered itself. A deep, guttural sound like breath drawn from the walls. Faint murmurs swell and distort. Narrator V. Oh, the ledger was never recovered, but after that night, every child in St. Bridget's began speaking in unison during their sleep, as if reciting from a script only they could hear. Fade out, the sound of whispering pages folding themselves shut. When faith cannot cure the sickness, it burns it. By autumn of 1876, St. Bridget's School had become a place of panic. 3 girls had vanished without trace. The others spoke in sentences, repeating Catherine Doyle's name until their voices cracked. The priests began to refer to it as the contagion. The diocese's answer came in the form of Father O'Malley, a man known for his exorcisms in the mining towns of Pennsylvania and for the fires he left behind. He arrived in Hollow Creek carrying nothing but a silver cross, a jug of kerosene, and a sermon written in his own blood. Witness accounts later suppressed describe how he gathered the remaining girls in the chapel, forcing them to kneel as he read from a manuscript that no one else was allowed to touch. The words were in Latin, but the girls seemed to understand. They wept, trembled, and then laughed, not with joy, with recognition. When he spoke the name Catherine, every candle in the chapel flared at once. The air grew thick, metallic, suffocating. One of the sisters screamed that she saw faces in the flame, dozens of them, all small, all identical. Moments later, the fire erupted. Witnesses outside saw light pour through the stained glass like molten gold. Yet when the blaze was extinguished, the structure stood unharmed, every wall intact. Inside, the pews were empty. No children, no nuns, only Father O'Malley, found kneeling before the altar, his hands fused to the floor, his eyes burned white. On his tongue was a single Latin word, carved with ash, redeat, returned. The fire crackle fades to silence, replaced by the soft hum of a child singing, deep beneath the soundscape. Narrator V. Oh, the fire sermon was never recorded in any diocesan archive. But the towns that bordered Hollow Creek say the smoke that night smelled not of wood, but of blood and lilies. Fade to black, a heartbeat echoes under distant bells. Not all the children of St. Bridget's burned. In the spring of 1877, a relief wagon from the Lowell Parish Orphan Society arrived at the ruins of Hollow Creek to collect survivors. They found 6 girls, dazed, silent, and covered in soot, though the chapel itself was untouched by flame. Their eyes were dark, pupils dilated so wide that no color remained. They were relocated to Our Lady of Mercy Home in Boston, a converted rectory known for housing the spirit touched. The nuns there were instructed to keep them apart from the other children and to forbid them from speaking about St. Bridget's. But silence, it seemed, was their native language now. For months the girls did not speak. They hummed, low, wordless tones always in harmony, always just beneath hearing. Nurses described the sound as breathing that wasn't theirs. On June 3rd, one of the girls, Clara Finn, finally broke the silence. She asked for pen and paper. What she wrote made the attending sister faint. Catherine says the fire did not cleanse. It only woke what was beneath. By midsummer, the other girls began to speak again, but never of themselves. They recited confessions belonging to priests long dead, towns long buried, names that appeared nowhere in records. One whispered of a child buried twice under St. Bridget's, whose bones still moved when prayed over. Doctors from the diocesan hospital, diagnosed shared hysteria. But when one physician attempted to record the girls' voices for study, the phonograph melted from within, leaving the wax disc engraved with a single word burned backward, Doyle. A faint rhythmic knocking begins like hands tapping from the inside of a wooden box. Narrator V. Oh, the church transferred the girls within weeks. No forwarding records, no graves, only the whispers remain, the kind that make paper curl in the dark. Fade to black, the knocking stops mid. beat replaced by a deep inhale, as if the air itself remembers something. Every forgotten place leaves a residue, and sometimes even the government tries to wash its hands clean of it. In 1891, nearly 20 years after the fire, Hollow Creek was rediscovered by a team from the newly formed Massachusetts Bureau of Rural Development. Their mission was simple: survey abandoned settlements for potential industrial restoration. But the Bureau's records, declassified in fragments a century later, tell a far stranger story. Their lead investigator, Walter H. Crane, filed 7 reports before the operation was abruptly shut down. 6 survive. The 7th is missing. Crane's first report described the town as eerily preserved. As though frozen in time, furniture remained untouched, plates still set on tables. Yet every clock in every home had stopped at 12:13. The air was thick with an odor of burnt resin and lilies. His second report mentions something far worse: the discovery of an underground vault directly beneath St. Bridget's Church, the same crypt the diocese had sworn never existed. It was sealed by layers of plaster and bearing the Vatican sigil. In his third report, Crane wrote that they'd heard noises inside, low murmurs, rhythmic, almost like a child learning to speak. We recorded them, but the wax cylinder shattered before playback. By the 5th report, Crane's language began to deteriorate: shorter sentences, scattered Latin phrases. His last coherent entry reads, "The voices are not echoes, they answer." 2 days later, the Bureau declared Hollow Creek a restricted zone, citing unstable ground and risk of subsidence. Within weeks, the entire team vanished from public record. Their families received pensions and signed non-disclosure agreements that forbade mention of the town's name. Faint static rises like a voice trying to form behind the tape hiss. Narrator V.O. For nearly 60 years, Hollow Creek did not appear on any map. But in 1951, a photographer from Boston claimed he'd found it again exactly as it was in 1871. Unaged, unchanged, click, the tape stops, silence. A picture can capture more than light. Sometimes it captures the soul of a place and those who refuse to leave it. In 1951, a freelance photographer named Edmund Larkin traveled through Massachusetts documenting abandoned settlements. Hollow Creek, though missing from maps, drew him inexplicably to its moss-covered streets. He found empty homes, unbroken windows, and doors swinging in the wind, just as the Bureau reports had described decades earlier. He took one photograph of the main street. Upon developing the film later that night, he noticed something strange: a figure in the distance, not a shadow, not a trick of the light. A small girl standing perfectly still, staring directly into the lens. She wore 19th century clothing, a faded white dress, lace collar, black shoes, and her hair was parted neatly down the middle. But her eyes, they seemed to pierce the room where he developed the photograph, following him as he moved. On the back of the frame, written in pencil, though Larkin swore he had never touched it, were 2 words: "Do not speak." Terrified, Larkin returned to Hollow Creek the next day. The girl was gone. Only footprints remained: 3 small, perfectly circular depressions in the dirt, leading toward the old church. Inside, the pews were intact, the altar pristine, but beneath it, the floorboards bore fresh scratch marks, as though someone had been pacing for decades without moving. Larkin tried to photograph the floor, but his camera jammed. When he removed the film, it was completely blank except for a faint imprint, a tiny, childlike handprint. A soft whisper drifts through, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Narrator V.O. Catherine Doyle had returned. Or perhaps she had never left. Fade to black. The faint hum of a child singing begins, slow and distorted. Some places exist only in memory. Some are deliberately erased. Hollow Creek was both. After Edmund Larkin's unsettling encounter in 1951, researchers attempted to locate Hollow Creek on official maps, property deeds, and census records. They found nothing, no town hall, no post office, no mention of a single resident named Doyle, Larkin, or Crane. Even newspapers from the 1870s contained only blank spaces where the town's history should have been. Locals in neighboring villages avoided speaking its name. One elderly man whispered that the town had been unwritten by the church, the bureau, and others who know how to erase a place from the world without ever touching its walls. Yet Hollow Creek persisted in subtle ways, fields of wildflowers growing in perfect geometric patterns, wells that were always full yet never sourced, birds that circled in rigid formations above the church, refusing to land. Researchers noted that any photograph of the town seemed to distort reality. Trees twisted unnaturally, shadows moved against the sun, and light pooled in corners that should have been dark. Most disturbing of all were the accounts of children's voices. Travelers claimed to hear singing, whispers, and names spoken in a child's voice as they crossed Hollow Creek's invisible boundaries, voices that seemed to know their sins, their fears, and the secrets they had buried themselves. It became clear that Hollow Creek existed in a liminal space, a town that never officially existed, yet could never fully disappear. It was a place shaped by the memory of a single child, Catherine Doyle, whose voice had become the architecture of the town itself. A faint, distorted echo of a child laughing, the sound lingers unnerving. Narrator V. Oh, to step into Hollow Creek is to step into her memory, and her memory is patient, and it remembers everything. Fade out, the faint, rhythmic tapping of small footsteps begins beneath the silence. Some lessons are never taught in classrooms, some knowledge is carefully hidden until it speaks for itself. By the late 1920s, rumors of Hollow Creek and the Doyle children had reached several seminaries along the eastern seaboard. While officially dismissed as folklore, internal correspondence reveals a chilling reality. Seminaries were instructed to track survivors, record their behavior, and ensure their voices never went unheard. Father Matthias Crow, a Jesuit historian, noted in his private journal, "The girl, or the girl's echo, is a teacher. She instructs not in prayer, but in revelation. I have seen priests tremble when the children whisper her words, one voice, many mouths." Seminaries began what would later be described as containment through education. Orphans and wards who exhibited unusual awareness, knowledge of unspoken sins, uncanny understanding of ecclesiastical secrets were sent to isolated boarding seminaries. They were trained to suppress their voices, but never silenced entirely. Those who failed were quietly removed. The records are meticulous, though incomplete. Children vanish. Seminaries report them as transferred, though no evidence exists of their destination. In rare surviving accounts, witnesses describe small children whispering prophecies of corruption, betrayal, and death, always signing their statements with the word Doyle. Some faculty reported strange occurrences, texts rewritten overnight with unfamiliar handwriting, candles burning in impossible patterns, spelling names no one could recognize, walls bleeding faintly when the children were frightened or disciplined. Father Crow's final journal entry, undated and found decades later in a seminary vault, concluded, "It is not the children who are dangerous. It is her memory, Catherine Doyle, alive in every syllable they speak, and she watches." A faint, childlike laughter rises beneath the narrator's voice, distorted, layered over the echo of reciting prayers. Narrator V. Oh, for over 50 years the church did not destroy her. They only taught others to fear her and to listen. Asterisk fade to black. A single syllable echoes, Catherine. Asterisk not all those who vanish are lost. Some remain trapped, observed, and transformed. By 1932, several of the Doyle children and other gifted wards of St. Bridget's School had been relocated to St. Agnes Hospital for Nervous Disorders, a private asylum on the outskirts of Boston. Officially, they were admitted for hysteria, sleepwalking, or night terrors. Unofficially, the hospital served as a research facility for voices that should not exist. The first record comes from Dr. Samuel Whitmore, the attending psychiatrist, who noted, "Patient number 12, referred to herself as Catherine Doyle, speaks continuously in the night, recalling sins and secrets of staff, patients, and visitors. Her voice is not her own. It contains histories I have never studied, knowledge I do not possess." Whitmore began keeping audio cylinders, but each recording distorted inexplicably. Voices overlapped with the child's, forming impossible conversations in languages no one taught her, Latin, Irish, even ciphers that resembled the shape of names burned long ago. Staff reported phenomena growing worse: footsteps pacing corridors when no patients were awake, walls that bled a faint gray ash in the shape of small hands, patients speaking in unison about buried children, forgotten towns, and rituals never performed. Dr. Whitmore attempted to isolate the children in soundproof rooms. Each night, they would sing the hymn of Hollow Creek, soft at first, then louder until doors rattled, windows trembled, and he swore the building itself seemed to pulse with a heartbeat not its own. In his private journal, Whitmore wrote, "They are not possessed by spirits, nor haunted by demons. She is here Catherine Doyle, and every room she inhabits becomes her echo. I fear she teaches us what we are too blind to see." A soft, distorted lullaby rises beneath the narration, overlapping with faint scratching sounds on metal. Narrator V. Oh, by the end of that year, 3 patients disappeared. No bodies, no notes, only the echo of her hymn remained, etched into the walls like a warning. Fade to black, a faint whisper, "Do you remember me?" Some presences do not fade, they wait, patient in the cracks of memory until the world forgets to look. In 1947, the newly renovated Havenwood Rehabilitation Facility, built over the ruins of St. Agnes Hospital, became home to a group of orphans and war-affected children. Staff reported that certain wards seemed to possess an unusual awareness, recalling events and secrets no one could have known. Among them was a girl who called herself Catherine, though her surname was unknown. She arrived quietly, her hair parted in the same 19th century style described by Edmund Larkin decades earlier. Staff initially dismissed the similarities as coincidence until she began to speak. She whispered, "The fire never cleansed, the walls remember." Soon after, children in the dormitory began exhibiting behaviors that mirrored the historical accounts of Hollow Creek. They whispered confessions from absent staff, predicted small disasters, and spoke of buried secrets in the foundations. Nurses noted that when Catherine passed through a room, the air felt heavier, colder, as if reality itself yielded to her presence. The head administrator attempted to isolate her, confining her to a single room, but reports emerged of doors opening on their own, lights flickering in impossible patterns, and scratching sounds under the floor. Patients who had never interacted with her began repeating phrases she had spoken even when she was asleep. By midwinter, some staff claimed to hear her singing the Hollow Creek hymn in languages no one had taught her, and walls began to display faint scratches, forming letters that spelled "Redeet." A soft, chilling echo of children's voices layers beneath the narration, a hymn stretched and warped. Narrator V. Oh, Catherine Doyle had returned, not as a child, not as a memory, but as a force. A presence that could not be confined and would not be ignored. Fade to black, the faint echo of a child's laugh, distant, deliberate, and unnervingly familiar. Once a voice is heard, it cannot be unheard. Once a secret is known, it cannot be forgotten. By 1948, the Havenwood Rehabilitation Facility had become infamous among its staff. The children whispered to each other in the dead of night, voices low and synchronized, forming patterns that no one could decipher. Nurses and aides reported doors opening on their own, faint shadows moving against the light, and whispers that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The center of this phenomenon was the girl called Catherine. Her presence seemed to awaken something dormant in the other children. They began to recount confessions of long, dead parishioners, missing children, and hidden sins of their caregivers, often reciting names and dates that predated their births. A visiting psychiatrist, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, noted, "It is as if they are conduits, each child a voice in a chorus, and Catherine Doyle is the composer. They do not speak from memory, they speak from something older, something buried." Staff who tried to isolate her reported strange occurrences, walls pulsing as if breathing, small handprints appearing on windows overnight, though no child had touched them, scratches forming words in Latin, warning the staff to listen or perish. Even children who had never met her began uttering the name Catherine in their sleep, their voices blending into a single, haunting harmony. The ward became known as the Ward of Whispers, a place where secrets surfaced unbidden, and every adult in proximity felt their private sins echoing back to them. A distorted lullaby begins, layered with multiple overlapping child voices. The hum intensifies, rhythmic and obsessive. Narrator V. O. In that ward, Catherine Doyle was no longer a child. She was a force, a memory made flesh, a voice that could reach across decades, and her whispers demanded to be heard. Fade to black, the hum continues faintly like a pulse beneath the silence. Fear is contagious, and when fear meets a memory older than the mind, it becomes something else entirely. On October 31st, 1948, the Havenwood Rehabilitation Facility experienced what staff would later call the Night of the Locked Doors. It began quietly, a single girl, Catherine, humming the Hollow Creek hymn in the dormitory. Other children joined her, their voices blending into a low, discordant chant. By midnight, doors throughout the ward had locked themselves. Staff were trapped inside with the children. Windows would not open. Telephones were dead. The electrical lights flickered violently, and shadows seemed to crawl along the walls independently. Nurses reported hearing confessions spoken in their own voices, though no one had uttered a word. Whispered secrets of hidden sins, forgotten debts, and long ignored cruelties filled every corner of the ward. Some staff swore they saw faces emerging from the plaster, watching, accusing. One doctor attempted to calm the children, but Catherine fixed her gaze on him and whispered a single word, "Read it." Immediately, the children began repeating everything he had done wrong, in the exact order and detail he had never admitted to anyone. Panic spread. Staff felt their thoughts no longer private, their intentions visible, their very essence exposed. By 3:17 a.m., the lights went out completely. When emergency crews arrived at dawn, every door was open, the children asleep and unharmed, yet staff reported physical exhaustion far beyond explanation. Every watch in the building had stopped at 3:17 a.m. A faint, persistent echo of the Hollow Creek hymn hums beneath the narration, distorted and haunting. Narrator V. O. The Ward of Whispers had spoken, and those who heard it would never be free. Catherine Doyle had shown them that memory, once awakened, cannot be locked away. Fade to black. A single metallic click, like a lock snapping shut, lingers. What is recorded never truly dies, and some records remember things that the living would rather forget. Following the events of the Night of the Locked Doors, a small group of archivists within the diocese began documenting occurrences related to Catherine Doyle. They called it the Whispering Records. These were not standard reports. They were confidential logs, hidden in locked vaults, written in coded Latin, and carefully cross-referenced with the disappearances of children, priests, and staff across New England. Entries describe impossible phenomena, children reciting confessions that would not exist for decades, buildings vibrating as if responding to unspoken words, shadows moving against light, forming shapes of small, outstretched hands. One chilling report, dated June 12, 1950, reads, "The girl speaks again through the smallest one. She names sins of men long dead. She says, 'I have not left Hollow Creek.'" Another describes a night when the records themselves whispered, filling the room with a chorus of voices that were not there, and each archivist hearing their own transgressions recited back to them. Some fainted, others went mad. The whispering records show a pattern. Wherever Catherine Doyle or her memory appeared, truths long buried surfaced, and those in authority were forced to confront secrets that had been hidden, ignored, or erased. The archivists concluded that Catherine was not bound by time or space. She existed in layers of memory, inhabiting children, walls, and objects alike, ensuring that secrets could never remain buried. A faint, childlike humming rises beneath the narration, warped and echoing. Narrator V. Oh, by the time the 1950s arrived, the church realized Catherine Doyle was no longer a child. She was a force, a voice of revelation, and a reminder that memory, once awakened, will always speak. Asterisk fade to black. The faint sound of whispering grows louder, overlapping syllables. Catherine. Catherine. Asterisk when silence fails, they try fire. When fire fails, they try stone. And when stone fails, there is only despair. By 1950, the church and select federal authorities coordinated what they called the final containment. The goal, to seal away Catherine Doyle's presence, her memory, and the voices that had spread like a contagion across orphanages, seminaries, and hospitals for decades. Havenwood Rehabilitation Facility was evacuated under cover of darkness. Walls were lined with lead sheets and iron bars. Rooms were saturated with holy water, and every child suspected of carrying her voice was removed or isolated. Priests performed rites that lasted for days, invoking prayers long forgotten, but the containment failed. Witnesses, those few still allowed to speak, reported that the walls breathed, expanding and contracting as if alive. The floors pulsed beneath their feet, echoing tiny footsteps in impossible rhythm. Children in isolation rooms were found huddled together, whispering things no one dared transcribe, their voices harmonizing with a melody that seemed centuries old. Father McAllister, the lead priest overseeing the containment, recorded his final entry before disappearing. We tried to lock her away, to bury her beneath walls and rituals, but she is not bound. She has no beginning and no end. Every lock opens for her. Every silence answers her. Staff who entered the building afterward described the smell of burned wax, iron, and lilies, yet no candles had burned, and the faintest sound, always just beneath hearing, was that of a child humming a hymn that no one remembered learning, but everyone knew by heart. A low, distorted humming rises, layered with faint whispers saying, "Do not forget me." Narrator V. Oh, the final containment was never completed, and in the decades that followed, Catherine Doyle's voice persisted not just in buildings or children, but in the memory of every place she touched. Fade to black. A single, deliberate, childlike giggle echoes and fades into silence. Some presences do not stay confined. They move like shadows following the sun, slipping into cracks and finding new spaces to remember. By the 1950s, accounts of Catherine Doyle's influence began appearing far beyond Hollow Creek. Reports trickled in from orphanages in New York, seminaries in Philadelphia, and hospitals along the eastern seaboard. The same phenomena were described: children speaking of events they could not possibly know, whispered confessions of long dead priests, townspeople, shadows that moved against logic, walls that pulsed with faint, childlike laughter. One case involved a boarding school in Rhode Island, where a girl claimed to have walked through Hollow Creek in a dream and knew the sins of everyone in the room. Her drawings depicted the town in meticulous detail, though it had been officially erased from maps for decades. Families reported hearing tiny footsteps at night, doors creaking, and a soft voice repeating, "Remember me. Remember what you hid." Even adults who had once worked in institutions tied to Hollow Creek began experiencing dreams of the town, walking streets that no longer existed, hearing voices calling their names, recounting long, forgotten misdeeds. Archival documents later revealed that Catherine's memory seemed to propagate through children, objects, and even buildings. Wherever she touched, reality itself bent, revealing buried truths, suppressed crimes, and secrets people had tried to bury with fire, stone, or silence. The faint hum of children chanting grows, layered over the echo of metallic footsteps. Narrator V. Oh, by this point, it was no longer Hollow Creek that mattered. It was Catherine Doyle herself, a voice, a memory, a force that had transcended her town, and those who encountered her, or even remembered her, would never escape the whispers, fade to black. Faint, overlapping sound of dozens of children whispering, "She sees, she knows." She waits. All stories have endings, but some stories do not end. They linger like smoke, like memory, like the echo of a voice that refuses to be silenced. By 1950, Catherine Doyle had become more than a girl. She was a force embedded in memory, in walls, in the children she touched, in towns she haunted. Every institution that tried to suppress her only spread her influence further. Survivors, decades later, recounted moments when they heard her whispers in unexpected places, in a church they had never visited, in a school long abandoned, in a mirror when they were alone. One former nurse wrote in her journal, "I heard her name in my own voice, reciting sins I had never told anyone. It was not me. It was Catherine." It is said that those who try to record her, to capture her, to understand her, encounter failure. Tapes melt, photographs distort, ledgers rewrite themselves, and yet her presence endures, patient, observing, waiting for the next person to hear the whispers she has carried across generations. Catherine Doyle, the child who spoke secrets no one should know, is not gone. She is memory itself, a reminder that no secret remains buried forever. And sometimes late at night, when the wind bends just so through empty streets, her voice can still be heard, whispering, "I am here, I remember, and so do you." The faint echo of children humming the Hollow Creek hymn rises, layered and distorted, before fading into absolute silence. Narrator V.O. whispering, and if you listen closely, you might hear her whisper your name next. Fade to black. End.